I'm Elota Patton. I'm here with Deirdre Mendez. Deirdre is on the faculty of the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. She's a cultural consultant, a speaker, and the author of The Culture Solution, a book on intercultural management. She's developed a method called cultural analysis to help business people manage in the global workplace. Deirdre, your work focuses on helping international business people manage cultural challenges. Why is cultural difference important to business?
Cultural difference is important to any company doing international business. At the corporate level, not having a plan for cultural integration can derail international mergers and acquisitions and outsourcing projects. Studies are showing a failure rate of international mergers and acquisitions as high as 50%, with cultural problems playing a significant role. And cultural misunderstandings are often cited as a source of poor performance for outsourcing projects. At the other end of the spectrum, the individual level, more people than ever before are managing international teams and projects, interacting with international partners, and serving international customers.
Deirdre, you've developed a method, the ARC system, for managing cultural variation on international projects. What does ARC stand for?
ARC, A-R-C, stands for Analyze, Recognize, Capitalize.
How does the ARC system work?
You use the system to analyze the approach your international employees and partners are taking to identify their cultural tendencies. And knowing these helps you recognize culture-based problems you're having and potential synergies you can achieve. And you capitalize on this knowledge by managing in a culturally appropriate way that gets everyone on board to achieve your desired business outcomes.
We've heard a lot about cultural awareness over the years. Why did you think a new approach was called for?
Cross-cultural management is quite a new field and it's still evolving. Traditional cultural training tends to focus on cultural awareness. I felt we needed a method that helped business people recognize and solve business problems. And the cultural information available to business people was very general. I wanted to offer something more specific.
What do you mean by general?
Most training systems rely on country generalizations. For example, Switzerland places a high value on punctuality, or Brazil is more relaxed about schedules, and so on. If you had that information and you were managing an employee from Switzerland and one from Brazil, you would use the country profiles to predict the attitudes of those employees. But within any country, there's huge variation. For example, I work with Brazilians, and people from São Paulo resent being characterized as relaxed about time. They come from a big commercial city where punctuality is valued, and they feel this characterization is a stereotype and even a little insulting. If you're doing business with people from São Paulo, that country profile of Brazil won't be very helpful.
And we don't do business with countries.
Well, exactly. We do business with unique companies and teams and individuals who are all different from each other. I wanted to help people identify their contacts' unique tendencies, whether or not they fit a country profile.
How does the ARC system help identify these unique tendencies?
The system teaches people to create a profile of their own cultural orientation on an 8-dimension framework by answering a set of simple questions, and to identify cultural tendencies in their international contacts. Comparing those two profiles helps them identify what I call the critical cultural dimensions for a relationship. Those are the ones that are likely to cause confusion or conflict, and, interestingly, the ones that offer the potential for cultural synergy.
Assuming that someone knows the possible problems that could show up and the synergies, and I'm going to get to the synergies later, how do they apply this knowledge?
People can use the ARC system to avoid culture-based problems. Misinterpretations or mistaken judgments of each other's personal styles and actions. And they can also use it to solve any culture-based problems they're already having. And they can use it to develop strategies for specific business functions to get results. Those business functions might include hiring or interviewing for a job, managing people or projects, negotiation or sales, and so on. For each dimension in the framework, there are specific strategies for accomplishing business goals.
Who is the ARC system designed for? Who should use it?
The ARC system is designed for anyone with international responsibilities. People who work abroad, of course, or who manage international teams or projects, or who interact with international partners, or who serve international customers.
You also talked about cultural synergies. What are those?
In the ARC system framework, each dimension is a continuum between two different cultural tendencies. I mentioned punctuality and a more relaxed attitude towards time and organization earlier, right? Well, each tendency has strengths and weaknesses. Punctual people are very reliable, but not as flexible. They don't always manage change well, and they don't like surprises. Their counterparts on the opposite end of the spectrum, flow-oriented people, are not as reliable, but they're more flexible and creative.
So no tendency is inherently better than another.
Exactly. All of them have something to offer. And synergy comes from meeting everyone's cultural needs so that you can leverage the strengths of all the approaches. On a synergistic team with schedule and flow members, the schedule members would take responsibility for keeping things on track and rely on the flow members for flexibility and creativity. And you create these synergies while you prioritized your desired business outcomes to achieve a goal-based culture. And when two companies come together to merge or collaborate, they need to establish a merger or project culture based on their common goals, and they need to bring their policies and systems into alignment with those goals. They can use cultural analysis to identify underlying cultural differences between their two companies and to create policies and systems that minimize the cultural discontinuities and create those culture-based synergies.
That sounds challenging. How do companies both create a goal-based culture and meet the cultural needs of everyone concerned?
It sounds harder than it really is. The key is to develop policies that reflect your desired outcomes and use culture-based management techniques to motivate your employees to support them. For example, suppose you've opened an office in a highly network-oriented environment. A network environment is one where employees would prioritize personal connections and an interactive environment and probably do a lot of communication with each other throughout the day. And suppose that in that environment, there's too much socializing going on at work. In that kind of situation, you might want your employees to spend more time working and to have more focus and to spend less time socializing. And you want them to do it willingly. Right. Well, your first step would be to communicate the importance of this focus that you want to achieve and its relationship to your project or your company goals. And then you would establish procedures, manuals, and processes that would encourage people and guide them in the behaviors that you want them to adopt. You might also create a program that rewards improvements in quality and increased productivity and so on, so that you're supporting those behaviors. But that's only half the equation. You've moved them from the network orientation towards a process orientation. But how happy are they going to be about that? So you need to also find a way to acknowledge and support that social element that's so important to them. For example, a regularly scheduled social event, honoring a holiday or an athletic activity or something along those lines. And if you do that, you need to make sure that you attend and that your managers participate, so it will be genuine. And by doing that, then you're prioritizing your outcomes that you desire, but you're also finding ways to address people's culture-based priorities.
Suppose I want to use the ARC system. What are the steps?
First, you'll create a cultural profile for each of us. You'll answer the questions and you'll have me do that too. Or if that's inconvenient or awkward, you could create a profile for me based on what you've noticed about my communication and my behavior.
Suppose you're a new hire from, I don't know, India. Do I have to wait until I meet you?
No, you can create a preliminary profile from a description of India, something you find in a book or on a website. Actually, my website, deirdremendez.com, has quick reference profiles that you can use. Really, any other source of information about the country. But you should keep in mind that when you meet me, you're going to need to update that profile based on the tendencies you observe in my communication and behavior, because not all Indians will behave the same way.
Once I have the 2 profiles, what do I do?
To create the profiles, you'll create a chart for each of us, and comparing the 2 will help you identify the critical dimensions, the ones where we're very different from each other. And that will help you predict the potential problems in our interaction. Since we know each other, I know that you're pretty strongly network-oriented and I'm process-oriented. So do you want to use that as an example?
Yeah, that sounds like a great example.
Okay. Network-oriented people, tell me if I'm right, tend to achieve your goals by leveraging relationships.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Whereas I'm more likely to use processes and systems and try to do things on my own. So one example of a problem we might see in the workplace, a problem that we might have working together, is that in meetings, for example, you would want to begin by
acknowledging the relationships in the room,
catching up on personal information with
Absolutely.
other people and so on. And I'm more likely to enter the room with an agenda, and I'm kind of feeling some anxiety about getting down to business and starting. Does that sound familiar?
It sounds very familiar.
Well, you and I come from this very similar cultural background, so we're not that far apart. But let's just imagine that we're further apart on that continuum, and you are super network oriented. I'm extremely process oriented. In that case, there would be judgments that we might have about each other, right? Because there are judgments associated with each tendency. So I might seem a little bit cold and standoffish, maybe unfriendly to you. Suppose that you're my manager on a highly network-oriented team, maybe in a highly network-oriented company, and I'm a new hire and I'm very process-oriented. And I'm showing some impatience in meetings with other people. Maybe while they socialize, I'm kind of looking at my watch and fidgeting. And maybe I'm also skipping social events that other people attend regularly. And my coworkers are starting to complain that I'm unfriendly and impatient. So these are very common issues for a process employee in a network environment.
And then how do I use this knowledge to manage you?
So to structure your argument, you would start by first of all, by expressing empathy from my perspective and recognizing its strengths. You understand that I'm committed to getting the job done and accomplishing the corporate goals, and these are valuable attributes. And once you've established that rapport and sympathy from my perspective, then you want to coach me to see that there are some tools available in your environment that I'm not using to meet my goals.
Tools, for instance?
Well, you would explain, for example, the value of personal relationships on your team, the social currency that is the way that people get things done. You might also explain that promotion policies on your team reward strong working relationships.
And how do I convince you to use these tools?
Oh, well, that's a good point. You should recognize that each cultural tendency responds to specific persuasive strategies. So first, you would consider the values associated with my process orientation: efficiency, prioritizing facts and logic, and outcomes, and so on. And you would want to frame your argument in terms of these. In a highly network environment like your team, creating and leveraging relationships is the most logical approach, and using relationships as a tool is the most efficient way for me to get things done. Those are vocabulary terms that I'm familiar with. And you'd want to let me know that given your team culture, I can best meet my own goals by using a more interactive approach.
And why should I go to the trouble of stepping outside my comfort zone to communicate through your cultural lens?
Because your goal is to improve my performance. Coaching me through my cultural lens is the most effective way to do that.
Well, 8 dimensions sounds like a lot to learn. How long does it take, and what's the process?
Well, fortunately, you don't need to learn all 8. You'd begin by creating a cultural profile of your new contact, me for example, and comparing it with yours to identify those cultural critical dimensions for the relationship. And there will probably only be a few. And you learn the cultural attitudes and expectations of your contacts for those, and then just develop strategies for working with them successfully.
Okay, so I focus on the places where we have the most challenges. And then I have your book, The Culture Solution, which has all of the 8 dimensions and the ARC system, and I can learn and practice with this.
Yes, the Culture Solution takes you through the whole process and provides strategies for many different business functions. And my website, deirdremendez.com, has resources for practicing using the techniques described in the book.
And that's Deirdre Mendez, author of The Culture Solution, creator of the ARC system. This system will help companies manage across teams, across companies, across cultures, and across countries. Deirdre, thank you so much for your commitment to teaching the world to communicate.
Loda, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot.